Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to this special edition of the Air Raid Hour presented by the Cover One Sports Network. My name is Steve Mathis. You can find me on Twitter at Judge Mathis. And of course, you can also find us on Twitter at The Bills Guys. And I'm here for sort of this special pop-up episode because I want to walk you guys through my 2023 Buffalo Bills mock off season. And the reason why I want to do that is because, I'm super excited about it. Every single year I tell myself, this is the year I'm going to stop doing mock off seasons. It's pointless. It's worthless. Just find some free agents you like, talk about them, find some draft picks you like, talk about. But every year I sort of get sucked into doing these mock off seasons. And this is one that I've been spending some time over the past couple of weeks, sort of perfecting and adding to as free agents become available. And I want to sort of walk you through what I hope the Buffalo Bills offseason will look like. And as I go along here, feel free to critique me and grade me. And I sort of broke this down into three major phases or components. Number one, freeing up the cap space necessary for the Buffalo Bills to even sign free agents or re-sign any players on this team this season. The second phase is obviously free agency, adding new players to the football team, re-signing some players. And then the third is the NFL draft. And once I go through those three phases, I'll sort of walk you through what I hope the Buffalo Bills 53-man roster will look like when this next season begins. Forewarning, my mock-off season probably looks a lot different from yours. I took a couple of swings and I took a couple of risks. I'm not even talking about monetary risks, but I'm taking a couple of chances on some guys, maybe making some draft picks that not everyone's going to agree with. But I think it's going to change the tone, and I think it's going to change the mindset of this football team. And I think that's going to help propel us, especially in January when it comes time to play in the playoffs. So let's start with phase number one here, and that's freeing up cap space. And I essentially, I stole my homework here from the Cover One guys in their salary cap extravaganza a couple of weeks ago. I made a few minor tweaks to it, but here is what I did for the Buffalo Bills to free up cap space. Obviously, Josh Allen with his base salary restructure saves us $21.5 million. Same with Von Miller's roster bonus conversion, which saves the Buffalo Bills $10.8 million against this year's salary cap. This is money these guys were going to get paid anyway, and it's kicking the can down the road a little bit. But as the salary increases year after year after year, these are risks the Buffalo Bills and really any competitor are going to have to take. Those are the two that are a given. You should probably expect to hear those announced by Monday when the free agent tampering window opens. From there, I'm taking a couple of chances here with a base salary restructure of Deion Dawkins, $6.4 million saved, a base salary restructure of Trey White, $5.8 million saved. Daquan Jones extension saves us $3 million this year. Teron Johnson, extend him, add a couple of years onto that contract, save $3 million in 2023. And then you sit Tim Settle, you sit Nyheim Hines down, and you tell them, listen, you have two choices. We're going to release you, or you guys can restructure your contracts and take sort of a pay cut. And maybe the money that they would have earned, because, Nyheim Hines was going to make about almost $5 million this year. You can earn that back in playing time incentives. If you are a $4 million player, we will pay you $4 million. So guys like Tim Settle, guys like Nyheim Hines, they look at the market. There's a ton of players in those markets. It's unlikely that they're going to get a ton of money. Why not stay where they're comfortable? Tim Settle and Nyheim Hines take pay cuts, $2 million a piece saved there. So the Buffalo Bills, when the free agent window opens, are sitting at approximately $35 million in cap space when we sort of start this mock off season. And that leads us to phase number two, free agency. Now, before we get to phase two, a couple of people are going to say to me, I can just predict what's going to happen. What about Ed Oliver? That's an easy $10 million to save. There is no Ed Oliver move here, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Spoiler alert, at some point in this mock-off season, Ed Oliver is going to get moved, and this $10 million, his $10 million cap hit, is going to come off the books. It's just my opinion that the Buffalo Bills can't trade out Oliver until they have some form of replacement for Ed Oliver in place. But we talked last year, or at least I talked last year, when Tremaine Edmonds had 1 year left on the contract. I said the Buffalo Bills needed to, or get off the pot with Tremaine Edmonds. And I was a proponent of either trading him and drafting a linebacker or signing a linebacker last year, or extending him. The Buffalo Bills chose to do neither, and now we find ourselves in the situation we are with Tremaine Edmonds. I'm in the same place with Ed Oliver. However, I'm not as confident in Ed Oliver's future in the Buffalo Bills as I was with Tremaine Edmonds last year. I don't want to extend Ed Oliver. So the only other sort of avenue to go other than keeping him on the roster for 1 year at 10.5 million and then risk losing him for maybe nothing or getting a compensatory pick if he signs for big money elsewhere would be trading him for a draft pick now, which will come later on in my mock off season, and it will free up later another $10.5 million of salary. But phase number 2 is free agency. And I sort of broke it up into some windows of free agency here. And the first thing that I want to do in free agency is I want to make sure that Tremaine Edmonds and Jordan Poyer are properly replaced. So I'm starting with sort of here Eric Kendricks. He's a veteran. He's a known commodity in coverage. He may have lost a slight step over the past couple of years, but he is still a solid veteran presence. He applies pressures when needed. He's solid against the run. He's got a 3.3 average depth of tackle versus Tremaine Edmonds' 3.4 average depth of tackle. And signing Eric Kendricks to this 2-year, $16 million deal, $6 million in the first year, is the amount of money you'll be paying him. You sort of give yourself a 2-year window to go find a more youthful inside linebacker who you can project there long term. So to me, Eric Kendricks is the perfect short-term stopgap option at inside linebacker. Other people might say Bobby Wagner. Other people might say Levante David. Some people might want to go out and sign a Bobby Okereke. I like Eric Kendricks because I don't think he's going to cost you as much as some of those other guys, and he doesn't count against the compensatory pick formula. So Tremaine Edmonds goes out and signs that big deal. You sign Eric Kendricks to a much smaller deal. You're collecting likely a 3rd or a 4th round draft pick next year, depending on what else you do in free agency. The next player I want to go after to fill the Jordan Poyer role, and I want to add a veteran safety, is I want to add John Johnson II, formerly of the Cleveland Browns and previous to that of the LA Rams. He was paid a few seasons ago a big money deal, and he was paid for a reason. He is a rangy, veteran, solid safety. He was a teammate of Matt Milano at Boston College too, so that might help the Buffalo Bills out a little bit in the recruiting process. He's another guy who, since he was released, does not count against the compensatory pick formula. Many Browns fans sort of question John Johnson's effort. So this is something where they're like, well, he missed 20-something tackles this year. We question his effort. We question his heart, etc. So a 1-year deal for a guy like John Johnson, who we know is a talented football player, to come to a contending team to rebuild his value, you're expecting the best out of John Johnson. And even if not, you're still going to go out and get some younger players, and we're going to address that in the draft, who could possibly fill John Johnson's spot. So those are the first 2 signings that I'm making, Kendricks and Johnson. They don't count against the comp pick formula, and they're 2 solid veteran stopgap options at those 2 positions. The second thing I'm doing in free agency is I'm addressing the offensive line. I'm actually going to try to attempt to protect Josh Allen. And I'm making 3 signings here. And these might not be the splashy name signings, guys like Ben Powers or Dalton Reisner, but these I think are 3 value under the radar guys who could come in and could significantly beef up the Buffalo Bills offensive line, as we're sort of balling on a little bit of a budget this offseason. And these 3 guys are Elijah Wilkinson, who would come in and immediately be the first option at left guard, David Edwards, who would come in and immediately be the option at right guard, and Jermaine Olamanure, who would come in and would immediately be the starter at right tackle. These 3 moves would make Ryan Bates the best interior offensive lineman, best backup interior offensive lineman in all of the National Football League, with 3 position versatility. We've seen him play left guard. We've seen him play center. We've seen him play right guard. So now you have Ryan Bates as this versatile chess piece backup, and you can groom him behind Mitch Morse to possibly take over for Mitch Morse in 2024. So that frees up Ryan Bates to be a backup. And you know that injuries happen in the National Football League. So if Ryan Bates is your starter and he gets hurt, now it's like, what, a draft pick? Now Ryan Bates is your backup. Same goes for Jermaine Olamanure, who's had really 2 good years for the LA Raiders, for the Las Vegas Raiders, both run blocking and in pass protection. He's another guy like Wilkinson, who maybe it just took him a couple of years to gain some experience, but now they're starting to hit their strides as 27, 28-year-old players, and you expect them to carry that into their 29, 30-year-old seasons. So a guy like Olamanure starting at right tackle now frees up Spencer Brown. You can continue his development as a backup. He has the athletic ability to be a swing tackle. So gosh forbid, a guy like Deion Dawkins gets hurt, you have that athletic upside and Spencer Brown now who can back up at left tackle. You can sort of cross train him there. And our guy Greg Tomsett likes to point out all the time how he would love to see Spencer Brown take that Bobby Hart role as sort of TE3 and be your sixth offensive lineman, a versatile chess piece that you can use in short yardage, goal line situations as a run blocker. So Spencer Brown can still see the field, even though he's a backup in this situation. So through like the first week of free agency, I have addressed the offensive line and I have filled the two glaring holes on our defense. And then from there, you sort of play the waiting game a little bit. And once you sort of played the waiting game a little bit, you have some options here in the second tier of free agency. Some of these guys are guys we're bringing back. Some of these guys are some veterans from around the league. I'm going to start with Sam Darnold. I think that, free agency might not be too kind to Sam Darnold. He's going to see guys getting starting positions. And then when all is said and done, Sam Darnold's going to sit around and look like, all right, do I want to go to a place with maybe like a more questionable starter where some guy might get hurt and I might get a chance to play? Or do I want to go hang out with my buddy Josh Allen for a year, recoup my value like Mitch Trubisky did, collect a paycheck and maybe play for a winning culture, play for a winning team for the first time since college. So this one, maybe some people might call a little unrealistic, but no one ever would have thought that we would have signed Mitchell Trubisky a couple of years ago. So I'm throwing Sam Darnold out there at 1 year, $2 million, maybe 2-3 weeks into free agency when everything is sort of settled down. Dane Jackson is another guy where I wouldn't sign his RFA tender. I let him hit the market. But again, he's another guy a week, 2 weeks into free agency. He realizes there's nothing out there for him. Why not come back to the place that knows you, the place that drafted you, the guy that's giving you playing time? Now, a lot of people are going to be like, no, I want no part of Dane Jackson. I'm done with him. Kyer Elam is the starting corner. That's great. Somebody just came in the comment section, said Benford to safety. Well, if Christian Benford moves to safety, who is your backup corner if Trey White or Kyer Elam gets hurt? Jamarcus Ingram and Kyler McMichael. Do you want to draft a guy? Do we want to go spend more money in free agency? Dane Jackson has shown and proven to be a pretty reliable average NFL player. So if you can get him to come back for 1 year at $1.2 million, kind of like he did Levi Wallace a couple of years ago, it gives you a safety net. It allows you to move Christian Benford around a little bit. It gives you depth at the corner position, and you can go draft and you can go sign guys at other positions and maybe not worry so much about boundary corner. And then last but not least here in this next wave is Sam Martin. Give him a 1 year, $1.8 million deal. Just bring him back. Don't worry about punting. He's going to come back. He wants to play on a winning team. He doesn't have to punt that much. Sam Martin will come back here, just be an average punter for us. That's all we need him to do. Then as you sort of hit the final wave of free agency here, and it's sort of cut off a little bit at the bottom, you have Dante Fowler and Shaq Lawson. Bring in those two edge rushers for veteran sort of smaller deals, just some stopgap solutions until Von Miller gets back at midseason. Dante Fowler might not be what he used to be, but Dante Fowler can maybe still get you 5 or 6 sacks and just get you over the hump to around Thanksgiving when we expect a guy like Von Miller back. And same with Shaq Lawson. Shaq Lawson was legitimately better than Boogie Basham last year. I want Shaq Lawson back. I think both Shaq Lawson and the next guy I'm going to talk about, Jordan Phillips, both realized that it just was meant to be, that they were meant to be Buffalo Bills. There's not much of a market for them elsewhere. The grass isn't always greener on the other side. So bringing a guy like Shaq Lawson back a couple of weeks into free agency when maybe he realizes there's no money there on a 1 year, $2 million deal is best for both parties. And then last but not least, it's cut off by my screen here, but Jordan Phillips, again, a lot of people are like, well, he's always hurt. Again, do we want to go and do we want to pay major money for somebody in free agency? I don't know. So you bring Jordan Phillips back on a 1 year, $3 million deal. I think his price gets driven down. I think his price gets driven down by the fact that he's consistently injured and he's consistently never played well any place for Buffalo. He flamed out in Miami. He flamed out in Arizona. He takes a 1 year, $3 million deal to come to Buffalo. And I've just spent pretty much my $35 million allotment. But what I've done here is I have filled almost every single major hole on the Buffalo Bills roster. So I can go into the draft and I can draft just about anybody. You'll notice there's no running back on this list. I can draft a running back somewhere in phase 3 in the draft to come be an RB2 to James Cook. I can draft wide receiver. I can draft 2 wide receivers anywhere I want to come in and join Gabriel Davis, Khalil Shakir, Stephon Diggs. Now, some people might say, well, I want to go out and get a veteran in free agency. It's going to cost you a really big chunk of change. You're not going to be able to fill a lot of holes elsewhere. I would rather draft a younger guy. Well, the Buffalo Bills never play their young guys. They're going to have to this year. And Brandon Beane sort of already said that. He's like, we're not going to be able to fill every hole in free agency this year. We're not going to be able to do those things that we've done in years previous. I think this is the year the Buffalo Bills are going to draft a guy high, and they're going to play the guy that they drafted high. And I think one of those guys will be a wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills. And also, to that point, if Ken Dorsey evolves as a play caller into year 2, big if the offensive line blocks better with guys like Wilkinson, Edwards, and Alamanure, again, another big if, you'd expect, even if we don't add anything at wide receiver, which is Shakir, Davis, and Diggs, they'd at least be somewhat competent. So as we go into the draft, that will change, but at least you have your competent base of guys there as we head into the next phase. And phase 3 is the draft. And when you guys see this graphic, it's going to shock you a little bit. But I think this draft really does set the tone for this football team in January, in February, and it sort of represents a tonal shift in what the Buffalo Bills are all about. I spend my first 2 picks on defense. No one's going to like this, but I'm going to brace for it here. Here is sort of my mock draft. And with the first round pick, 28th overall, I take Mazie Smith, the defensive tackle out of Michigan. This is a size strength guy at 6'3", 330 pounds. He was on Bruce Feldman's freak list. He decided not to work out at the combine. He's going to blow up his pro day. And then a lot of people are going to be talking about him as a fringe first round prospect. He is a top tier run defender. He has pass rush upside. He is a 3-tech and a 1-tech's body. And let me tell you, and let me try to sell you on why I think Mazie Smith is the best pick. Ed Oliver, for all of his talents, gets pushed around a ton. And for years, we have been upset at the way our defensive line has shown up in the playoffs. We long for a Justin Simmons. We long for a Chris Jones. Those 330-pound defensive interior players that just push people around and have their way with offensive lines. Ed Oliver hasn't been that guy because he is about 290, 285 pounds. So go get Mazie Smith. Go get a guy who could possibly be a Chris Jones type, a Justin Simmons type. Go get that bigger body, 330-pound defensive tackle. Change the way your defensive interior works. And on top of that, you've doubled down. And in the second round, you take one of my favorite players in this draft, in Keanu Benton, the 1-tech from Wisconsin. Everybody in Bills Mafia loves Daquan Jones. We saw just how much the Buffalo Bills missed him in that playoff game against the Cincinnati Bengals. How about 2 Daquan Joneses on your football team? Because that's really what I feel like Keanu Benton is. 6'4", 315 pounds. He is a run stuffer. He is powerful. So now you have a defensive interior where you can pair Daquan Jones with Mazie Smith. And then on the rotation, you can bring Keanu Benton with Jordan Phillips at your 3-tech. You have a youthful, powerful, run stuffing, but also pass rush upside defensive interior. And all of a sudden, a guy like Ed Oliver is a luxury and you can get rid of him. And that's when you pick up the phone after you select Keanu Benton and you call up teams like the Chicago Bears, the Houston Texans, and you trade Ed Oliver for an early 3rd round pick. You get off of his contract before you have to extend him or before you lose him in free agency. You pick up that 3rd round pick here in my mock draft or my mock offseason scenario. And then the Buffalo Bills take Cedric Tillman, the wide receiver out of Tennessee. Now, a lot of people want sort of that alpha slot, and I want that alpha slot too. But in this scenario, I think a guy like Cedric Tillman is setting the Buffalo Bills up for success now and setting the Buffalo Bills up for success in the future. Tillman is 6'3", 215 pounds. He's sort of this option route, sort of Josh Heupel, offensive weapon, kind of like Gabriel Davis. He came out of the same system as Gabriel Davis. So he's a guy who you can project on the boundary. He's a guy who I think has high-end number 2, maybe even number 1 upside. He has possible alpha written all over him. And there was a tweet that I saw today from Thor Nystrom of NBC Sports that I sort of wanted to read out about Cedric Tillman and why I am so high on him. Thor Nystrom, tweeted out a nice little thread. I'm just gonna read it verbatim. Cedric Tillman is a better player plus prospect than Jalen Hylett. Not controversial, always has been. Tillman had an ankle injury last year, which helped facilitate Hyatt's breakout. Head coach Josh Heupel is one of the sport's best play callers. His usage when both were healthy the past 2 years is telling, meaning he threw the ball more to Cedric Tillman when the two of them were both healthy on the field at the same time. Nystrom goes on to say Hyatt's body of work, he's a one-year wonder, a one-trick pony whose production was running by coverage-allergic DBs like DeMarco Hellams for one game and beating up on teams like Tennessee Martin, Akron, Mizzou, and Kentucky. His trick is speed, and he ran a 1/10 of a second slower at the combine than a prop O-line. Then he goes on to talk a little bit about Cedric Tillman here. Tillman's last 7 games of 2021, plus his first 2 games when healthy of 2022 before he got hurt, 63 catches, 1,100 yards, 11 touchdowns. Basically 7 catches a game, 122 yards, and a touchdown per game. And the teams that he played in that span included the 21 Bama defense, which was better than the 2022, the 21 Georgia defense, which was better than 2022, the 2021 Ole Miss defense, Purdue's defense, Kentucky's defense, and the 22 Pitt defense. So he terrified, and he played against SEC defenses very well. So a guy like Cedric Tillman sort of becomes an alpha possibility, and he adds another layer to this offense. You can have Davis, you can have Tillman on the outside, you can move Stephon Diggs into the slot. You can have Diggs on the outside. You can move Tillman into the slot, try to get him vertical. You can do the same, put Gabriel Davis in the slot. There are a ton of different things you can do, and that way you can let Gabriel Davis walk in free agency next year, and Cedric Tillman slides right into that spot as your bona fide number 2 receiver. From there, I go on to take Michigan tight end Luke Schoonmaker. He's sort of a Buffalo Bills archetype, 6'5", 250 pounds. The Buffalo Bills met with him. Rob Boris was on the field working out tight ends at the combine. I don't think that was a coincidence. The Buffalo Bills were sort of sniffing around a tight end last year. Guys like Evan Ingram, they signed O.J. Howard. It didn't work out. They brought in a ton of tight ends for a pre-draft visit. There's some smoke there, and I think this year that smoke will turn into some fire. I think that Schoonmaker is a fit. He fits the Bills' archetype. He allows us to possibly run some more 12 personnel this year. He's a plus blocker. He's a threat vertically in the seam, and he's an ultra-competitive kid. So I go with Schoonmaker here with the second of my third-round picks. And then that leads me to go back to the defense in the 4th round with one of my favorite sort of sleepers in this draft, and that's Shamari Connor, the safety out of Virginia Tech. He's a guy who I think could come in the 4th round and legitimately compete with John Johnson to be the starting safety outside of Micah Hyde. This guy's 6'4" or 6 foot 205. He sort of fits the mold of what the Buffalo Bills like in a DB. He's versatile. He can play nickel corner. He's played hundreds of snaps in his career on special teams. I really like Shamari Connor. And then later on in the draft, the Buffalo Bills add some pieces. Nick Saldivari from Old Dominion, who's an interior offensive lineman that I really like. He sort of fits that archetype that Aaron Cromer likes of a tackle who kicks inside to guard. You have Muhammad Ibrahim out of Minnesota, who I think is a plug-and-play RB2. And then the Buffalo Bills make a second trade. We have Shaq Lawson. We've signed Dante Fowler. Von Miller will be back eventually. I think the Buffalo Bills give up on the Boogie Basham experiment, or at least I'm willing to trade him to the Pittsburgh Steelers, who could use 5-tech type of defensive lineman like him for a 7th round pick, where the Buffalo Bills select a linebacker to fill out their linebacking core in Muhammad Diabate, a guy who sort of is a more of a weak side linebacker in the mold of Terrell Bernard and Matt Milano, but the Buffalo Bills met with him at the Shrine Bowl. He plays a lot of special teams. He's sort of just a 7th round sort of depth linebacker that the Buffalo Bills are looking for. So that leads us now to, what does the Buffalo Bills 53-man roster sort of look like in this scenario? And the Buffalo Bills have a lot of options after the draft. We've just freed up $10.5 million. So in this scenario, you're going to see that I've re-added Cole Beasley to the Buffalo Bills roster, but who knows? Any number of veteran receivers could emerge or still be on the market at this time period that the Buffalo Bills could go out and use some of that Ed Oliver money on. There could be a veteran running back still on the market or becomes available that the Buffalo Bills could go spend some money on. But to me, this is what the Buffalo Bills offense would look like in 2023 based on my mock off season. At quarterback, you'd have Josh Allen, obviously, with Sam Darnold as his backup. At running back, James Cook would become your workhorse with a guy like Ibrahim coming off, doing some short yardage stuff, doing the stuff between the tackles, the dirty work. And then you have Naheem Hines, who I think could be a versatile chess piece on this football team. He's your RB3. He can be sprinkled in there. He can do some of that Isaiah McKenzie stuff where he can do the jet sweeps and things like that in the passing game. You try to get him more involved this offseason in the passing game. And then he's obviously your alpha kick and punt returner. Fullback, you obviously have Reggie Gilliam back for another year. And then at wide receiver, you have Stephon Diggs as your X. You have Tillman and you have Davis as your sort of Z receivers. And then you have Shakir and Beasley working in the slot, with Des Patman being sort of your new Jake Kumaro, big special teams type of wide receiver. At tight end, you have Dawson Knox, Luke Schoonmaker, and Quentin Morris. I think if the offensive line improves their play, and I think if Ken Dorsey becomes a better play caller, evolves, learns from his mistakes in year one, to me, this is an offense that there's enough weapons here for Josh Allen to be successful, especially if James Cook takes a leap, especially if we figure out how to use Naheem Hines, if Cedric Tillman is who I think he is, if Khalil Shakir comes around, if Gabriel Davis gets better and continues to evolve. There is a lot of talent here that the Buffalo Bills can utilize, gets Dawson Knox more involved, etc. The talent is there skill position-wise. So let's take a look at the offensive line. I'm a big proponent. I'm going to be beating the drum for it all season long. I want 10 offensive linemen on the 53-man roster next year, because injuries happen, and I want the Buffalo Bills to develop some guys. So I want them to use 10 roster spots on offensive linemen next year. I'm dead serious. I think this is a position the Buffalo Bills need to fortify, the Buffalo Bills need to develop. So from left to right, starting in this scenario, you'd have Deion Dawkins, Elijah Wilkinson, Mitch Morse, David Edwards, and Jermaine Olamior. Backups, you'd have Tommy Doyle continuing to develop, coming off his ACL, Ike Butker, Ryan Bates, who you can sort of develop behind Mitch Morse, and I think is a really good backup. Wilkinson gets hurt, he could play left guard. Morse gets hurt, he could play center. Edward gets hurt, he could play right guard. And then Nick Saldiveri, who I'm very high on as a developmental offensive lineman. And then obviously Spencer Brown, who I'm not willing to give up on. I think you could find a role for him, sort of that Bobby Hart type of role. He's a swing tackle. And then it's a little covered up on my screen here, but obviously Tyler Bass, and working out an extension for him, which is something that I forgot to put in my earlier scenario. You have some more money now. With Ed Oliver gone, you can extend a guy like Tyler Bass and Reed Ferguson as your long snapper. Finally, on defense, the defense is going to look something like this. And I think you're going to see a different defense, obviously, in 2023 than 2022. Sean McDermott is now probably going to be at the helm calling plays. I think you're going to have an Al Holcomb effect, where this defense is going to be a little bit more aggressive blitzing, because Holcomb did that a ton in Carolina, despite the fact that he was very familiar with McDermott and his scheme. Guys like Wilkes were a little bit more aggressive than Sean McDermott. But from left to right along the defensive line, you'd have Rousseau, Daquan Jones, Maisie Smith, Dante Fowler. Then coming in a rotation, Shaq Lawson, Keanu Benton, Jordan Phillips, AJ Epinesa. And again, I'd go heavy on the defensive line, at least until Von Miller is back. If Phillips gets hurt, you still have a guy like Brandon Bryant in the fold who can work into that rotation. If Dante Fowler or Shaq Lawson aren't giving you that pass rush pop you need, a guy like Kingsley Jonathan can be there. And he showed a little bit of promise towards the end of last season as well. At linebacker, you have Milano as your strong side backer, Kendricks as your Mike backer. You have Bernard and Spector as your top two backups. You have to develop. You have to make those guys your ready to play backups. You drafted them last year. The team doesn't have a lot of money. These two guys need to be able to come onto the field at any time and play special teams on top of that. And then you also have Diabate, the 7th round pick there as well. And then I'm really excited about the secondary. I think Trey White is going to round back into form, coming back year 2 after that ACL. I think Kyer Elam is ready to step up and make an impact in year 2. You have Teron Johnson, the nickel, Micah Hyde, and then John Johnson. And then there's some young guys to sort of be excited about. I sort of put a little asterisk next to Christian Benford, because we've already seen that he can be a solid corner. So he's some solid depth there in case Elam or White gets hurt. And by having Dane Jackson there, and by having Shamari Connor and Zane Anderson, by having some dudes there, you can start to cross-train Christian Benford. A lot of people think Christian Benford is just going to be a plug-and-play starting safety from day 1 in year number 2. I'm not buying it. To me, he's a guy you want to start cross-training in OTAs. You want to start cross-training in training camp. But I wouldn't expect Christian Benford to be an impact player or a starter at safety, barring injury, until at least mid-season of next year or 2024. So that's sort of my take there on the secondary. But looking at sort of the roster that I've constructed here, I think that this is a team that can win some games in the playoffs. I think they got stronger on the offensive line with this mock-off season. I think they added some run stuffing, some toughness, some pass rush upside, some big fat dudes to the defensive side of the line as well. And I think the skill position players are there. Guys like Elam, who we drafted previously, Shakir. So I didn't go too heavy on the flashy skill guys, right? I mostly concentrated on the trenches. And I think a lot of people are going to disagree with that. But I think if you look at that 53-man roster in its totality, that is a team that's built for January. That is a team that's built to beat teams like the Chiefs, et cetera, and not get pushed around. So that's my take. Let me know. Thank you guys so much for contributing into the live chat. I didn't get a chance to look over too much because I'm solo here. Usually when I'm with Dave, I'm reading the live feed while he's talking, so I'm able to better interact with you guys. So apologies for that, but let me know in the comment section of this video, how would you grade this off season, and leave your comment with your thoughts. What would you have done differently? Why do you like it? Why do you dislike it? And don't forget to catch the Bills, guys, live Mondays at 9 p.m. Dave and myself will be here for you guys the first night of free agency, breaking it all down. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you guys. And until next time, go Bills.